Hi folks, it's Brent Bozell at the Media Research Center. It's a very special guest we have for you today. It seems like this man, every time there's a story that breaks, within about 24 hours, there's a book from Peter Schweitzer that details everything you ever wanted to know about that story. Some of his books, Clinton Cash during the campaign, that was existential. Profiles in Corruption, Secret Empires. The one that I really liked was Throw Them Out. But the stories on the corruption in Congress were so important. A mutual friend of ours gave me that book to read, and he said, "You must read it." And I read it immediately. And I kind of wish I hadn't, because it's so startling. Okay, let me ask you first, Peter, about your Drill Down podcast and your latest book, Red Handed. On China. Lots of stories are going on about China. Tell me, what's your biggest takeaway? What do you think is the most important thing that you learned in the research about China?
Well, I think when it comes to China, the most important thing is to realize that our first family is compromised. And I don't say that loosely, Brent. I mean, the facts are clear and they have not been refuted because they can't be refuted. We know based on the laptop material, based on Hunter Biden's own communications and the wire transfers, that the Bidens received tens of millions of dollars from China, and that those deals were arranged by three businessmen. They're all named in the emails. I named them in my book. And all three of those individuals have ties to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. And again, I don't say that loosely, but you say, for example, Che Feng, who arranged for Hunter Biden to get an equity stake in that government-run investment fund. At the exact same time he is helping Hunter Biden secure that deal, Che Feng is business partners with the Vice Minister of State Security, which is the spy espionage apparatus of the Chinese government. In fact, this vice minister was in charge of foreign recruitment. You can look at another $5 million that was sent to the Bidens by a guy named Henry Zhao. Henry Zhao wires $5 million to Hunter Biden. Who is Henry Zhao? He is business partners at that time with the family of the former Minister of State Security who ran the entire spy apparatus. So, and you can go on and on. The point is, there's no question that the Bidens received this money and who the businessmen are that granted them those funds. So the question is, why do people think those individuals sent the money to the Bidens? Philanthropy? Charity? No, I doubt it. So we need to have a serious conversation in this country, and I think we're finally going to get it because this congressional committee is looking at it. We're continuing to look at it. But for me, this is the seminal issue that we face as a country right now, Brent. You and I are old enough to remember the Cold War. Could you imagine if the family of Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan had taken in tens of millions of dollars from Russian businessmen linked to the KGB? Alarm bells would be going off. That's precisely what we have with the Bidens today.
I trace this back a little bit to the Clintons too. I mean, you covered it better than anybody did, but you know, I'm surprised there wasn't a greater outrage when the story came out that the moment that Hillary Clinton lost the presidency, the money to the Clinton Foundation from overseas contributions evaporated. And within a couple of months, the foundation was shut down. If ever there was pay to play, to my thinking, it was during the Clinton administration when she was Secretary of State and money was pouring in from foreign governments into her foundation, into her family foundation, and they got away with it. I really do believe, I hate to say it, but I do believe the Clintons really are above the law. And I think this is just a continuation of that. This is people who believe they can get away with it. But along these lines, Peter, what is the strongest indication, if any, that goes directly to the president, then the vice president of the United States of America?
I think it's, you look at the posture and the policies of the Biden administration. You know, I talk about this in the book. The Chinese operate under a very specific principle or strategy called elite capture. That's their phrase, not mine. And they've used it in New Zealand, Australia. They use it in the United States. And it's pretty simple. We're going to enrich, we're going to forge commercial ties with prominent political figures, family members, etc. We're going to make them wealthy, and we're going to capture them because they're not going to want to have the money stop coming to them. So they're going to do favorable things for us. And by the way, Brent, they're very realistic. They don't expect these elites that they've captured to function like robots. They know they have to be politically viable. So they are willing to accept what they call big help with a little bad mouth. In other words, if you give them basically the big things they want, which is access to Western capital markets, basically unfettered access to our technology, access to our market to sell our goods without tariffs on them. If you give them those things, if you criticize them for the Uyghurs or you talk about Taiwan, they're not particularly concerned because you as a policymaker are giving the big things they want. That has been precisely the posture that Joe Biden has adopted. By the way, it didn't used to be his posture. As I talk about, you go back into his career in the 90s, the early 2000s, he was actually better on China. He has become very weak on China, and that weakness corresponds to when these commercial relationships began. So to me, you look at his policy, you look at his conduct, Beijing's getting exactly what they want from him.
You know, the circumstantial evidence is devastating, isn't it, Peter? That if Hunter's last name was Schweitzer, or Bozell, he wouldn't be getting $31 million in business. And Burisma wouldn't be giving, the Ukrainian people wouldn't be giving him the money that they gave him. And the fact that he traveled on Air Force Two to make these deals, that's another thing that shocks me about the press. If Donald Trump, you know, we keep saying if Donald Trump Jr., but we have to say it. If Donald Trump Jr. was on Air Force One, standing behind his father, making deals with companies when his father was on state business, his father would be impeached for a third time now. So it's you know, it is stunning to me. Okay, so let's look at the House Oversight Committee and Jim Comer. What is your level of confidence that he's going to get to the bottom of things?
It's a good question. I like what I'm hearing from the committee. I think Congressman Comer is showing the proper discipline and drive. What do I mean by discipline? Well, you know, we both know you can have political figures that end up grandstanding. It becomes more about them than it does about the actual facts and story. I don't see that from Comer, which is very good. I also see the drive. He's moving quickly. They had a little bit of a delay in staffing up because there was uncertainty about how big the majority would be, but he's staffed up and they have issued subpoenas and they've already had some successes in securing subpoenas. So I like what I'm seeing. I think the key thing that they have to do, Brent, is they have to approach this the way prosecutors would approach it, because I really do believe that you are looking at some serious legal issues. We know that this grand jury was convened in Delaware in 2018. That was in the fall of 2018. They convened that grand jury about 4 months after my book, Secret Empires, came out, which first exposed the deals in China. That grand jury has been meeting for 5 years. They took a little bit of time off because of COVID. But when you talk to U.S. attorneys, that's highly unusual to have a grand jury functioning that long. They don't sit around and twiddle their thumbs. So I think the combination of what I'm seeing from the Oversight Committee is very encouraging. I think they've got a good staff. I also think that we should not discount this grand jury, which is being led by, I think, a pretty good U.S. attorney who was appointed by Donald Trump. So I think we're almost going to see a pincer movement here over the next 6 to 8 months that should be quite interesting in at least revealing to the American people the full extent of the Biden's dealings with the communist Chinese.
I'm a little bit more cautious, I guess, than you, only because I do agree with you completely that the way that Congressman Comer is going about it is good, and you know, the news is new now that apparently there's another Biden family member that he's talking to, and that he finally got documents from the Treasury Department that they've been stonewalling him on for months. Yeah, which is to me, which is a startling proposition. If they're innocent, why are they stonewalling? Why aren't they providing every single thing and rushing to provide every single document that he could possibly ask for, if in fact they're innocent? But I watched throughout the Obama administration and the hearings that were held there. They seem to be always held because Judicial Watch had a FOIA, and they had to hold a hearing. And then Jim Jordan was always wonderful, and Trey Gowdy was always wonderful, and for everybody else it was chest thumping, but it didn't go anywhere. Okay, so let me switch the conversation to another area where you're an expert, the corruption in Congress. If you talk to people out in the countryside, everybody seems to believe that the only solution is term limits for members of Congress to stop this corruption. What's your solution?
Yes, there's no silver bullet. You and I, Brent, are both people of faith. We understand the corruption of power, the corruption of the human soul. So anybody that's looking for some silver bullet that's going to fix all this, it's not out there. It is part of the human nature. It's one of the reasons, by the way, I'm a conservative in sort of the classical liberal mold. I don't trust people with power. The solution is to limit power. I think term limits is a great idea. Is it going to fix everything? No. But nobody in Washington, D.C. is irreplaceable. That's what I think we have to begin with. You get a lot of people that serve there for 20 years. They go in probably with very good intentions, but there's a corrosive effect the more time that you spend in Washington. So I believe term limits is a great idea. I think there ought to be bans, lifetime bans on members of Congress from going into lobbying. As it relates to China right now, there are 23 former members of Congress and members of the U.S. Senate, a majority of them Republican, by the way, that at this moment are actually lobbying on behalf of not just Chinese companies, but Chinese companies linked to the military-industrial complex of China. To me, that's just a disgrace. So I think there are a series of reforms, but absolutely, I think term limits is a fantastic idea.
Would you extend this ban on lobbying to Defense Department officials? Because I would. I think there's tremendous corruption. I mean, we've got a budget, whatever the budget is, it's more than most countries' GDP, and yet China is outpacing us in an arms race right now, and the Defense Department has a tremendous amount of waste. But I think at the top levels, there's a great corruption there as well, because these four-star generals leave. Why is every general a multimillionaire today? Why do members of Congress leave and they're all multimillionaires today? I think you covered it very well in your book. So do you see this corruption going beyond Congress, and the reforms needed beyond Congress?
Yes, I do. It'd be interesting to have a discussion about whether there should be term limits for judicial appointments. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal expert, but I think when it comes to other branches of the government, the executive branch, for example, including DOJ, absolutely, it's a serious problem there as well. All you have to do is look at the issues associated with insider trading on the stock market, which is a story I broke back in 2011. Most of the attention there was on members of Congress, but you have huge problems with people in the executive branch who are regulating the healthcare industry. They're involved in education or the Pentagon, who are engaging in insider trading and the abuse of power. So absolutely, we need to limit power. We need to stop adopting the posture that so many people in Washington want us to have, which is, you need us. We're the wisdom. We're the smart ones. We can guide you. I think the experience with COVID and a whole series of other policies demonstrates that's not the case. So we need to have a regular churn of new people coming into positions of authority in the elected branch, but also in the executive branch as well.
I think it was in your profiles in corruption. I think it was in that book. I could be wrong. I remember reading a scenario you put forward about how a member of Congress can simply suggest that maybe there should be hearings on something, and that lobbying agency will explode in contributions so that there won't be hearings, as he said. And I saw that. I saw an example of this some years ago, where a member of the Senate, I'm not going to name him because he was well-intentioned in this case. We were talking about primetime television and the oversight that the FCC had of the federal airwaves. This senator said, maybe we should have hearings on the role of the FCC with primetime television. And you would not believe, Peter, the checks that came out. I mean, suddenly every senator got maximum contributions from the entertainment media, and they stopped it, and they stopped the hearings right then in their tracks. I think that it's frightening. I don't know. Maybe you've done analysis on this, but this is rather some time ago, so it's not current. But not too long ago, there was a study done on members of Congress after their first term, which is the term where you might be able to defeat them. After the first term, the percentage of members of Congress that win re-election is 98.1%. The same number as Fidel Castro. You can't beat these SOBs. They've given themselves, both sides of the aisle, even friends of ours, but the fact is, they've given themselves so much power. It's almost impossible to defeat them. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Brent. And unfortunately, they've created this sort of business industrial model while being in office. So both political parties, for example, have a system whereby if you are given a good committee assignment, financial services, for example, those committees are deemed to be A committees. Why? Because they're important? Well, maybe, but also because you are expected to raise a lot of money because you're on a powerful committee that a lot of special interests want access to. A committee like Veterans Affairs is considered a C committee, a lower committee, because you can't raise that much money off of veterans. This is the kind of transactional nature to which our elected officials look at this. A lot of this is done by Nancy Pelosi. Republicans have done the same thing. And it's an enormous, pernicious problem. And I think as long as we expect to get different results out of this similar mode of operation that has been erected over the last 50, 60 years, we're going to be sadly disappointed. We need to actually start reforming the system as well internally, the way that Congress operates, so it actually represents the interests of voters rather than the interests of special interests or those that are part of the sort of donor class. I believe in the First Amendment. I believe donors should be able to give money, but members of Congress should not be setting up their system of governance based on, and their committee assignments based on their ability to raise money from donors.
The Chamber of Commerce pours hundreds of millions of dollars into Washington, D.C., either through campaign contribution or through lobbying. Can you name me, from all of your experience, a single Fortune 100 company that has ever given money and not wanted something in return?
No, I can't. It reminds me of an old friend who's passed away, Milton Friedman, and I think he gave great advice. You probably know what I'm going to say. Milton Friedman said, "I'm not pro-business, I'm pro-free market," and it's very, very different. And you're exactly right. They are there to enhance their corporate interest. More power to them, but don't use our government to do it.
Yeah, 40 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce was the single greatest source of support for the conservative movement because it believed in the free enterprise system. But the Chamber of Commerce is there for itself. It's not liberal, it's not conservative. It's there just for itself. But you put in a contribution and you get Solyndra money back. And that's how it works. Okay, let me ask you a final question. I'm going to get ahead of the game here. I want to know what's the next most important thing we need to focus on. And the way I can find that out is to ask you, what are you working on now?
Well, it's a great question. I really am concerned about the situation with China and China's penetration, not only of Washington, D.C., but also of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. China's made clear their goals towards the United States. Xi is very open about it. And the fact of the matter is we are not responding, we're not engaging, we're not meeting the challenge, not because we can't, but because there are too many elements of our leadership class that have commercial ties, very lucrative ties to China. This to me is going to be a major issue moving forward. I think it's going to be a major issue in 2024. And my hope is, Brent, that we can continue to name names, not simply talk about it in theoretical terms, name names. Media Research Center has always done that in their research. I always try to do the same thing. So to me, that's really where the rubber's going to meet the road over the next 18 months.
Well, Peter, you're a special asset to the conservative movement. If there's one thing they can never challenge us on is facts. And it's book after book that you come out with fact after fact. You're indispensable to us. So thank you, Peter, for everything you do.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you, Brent.